My name is Matthew, and for as long as I can remember, saving lives wasn't just something I did, it was who I was. Being a paramedic wasn't just a job, it was a calling. I had seen people at their most vulnerable, teetering on the edge between life and death, and I'd spent years doing everything in my power to pull them back. Some days were exhausting. The endless hours, the adrenaline-fueled calls, the uncertainty of whether the person in front of me would make it. But no matter how hard it got, I held on to one simple truth. I was making a difference. I lost count of how many patients I had treated, how many hands I had held in their final moments, how many families I had comforted when the worst had happened. And no matter how many times I faced it, death never got easier. It was always heavy. But in the back of my mind, one question lingered. Why did some people survive while others didn't? I had witnessed miracles, patients who defied all odds and pulled through when they shouldn't have. And I had seen others slip away, even when everything had been done perfectly. I believed in God. I always had. But I didn't always understand him. I never doubted his existence, but I often found myself wondering, did he decide who lived and who died? Did he intervene in some cases but not in others? Or was it all just random? I tried not to dwell on it. My job was to fight for every life, to do everything I could, and to trust that the outcome was beyond my control. But I never imagined that one day I would be the one lying there, caught between life and death. It started like any other shift. Just another night, just another call. The radio crackled as we sped through the streets, sirens blaring. An accident scene. We had responded to hundreds of crashes before, each one a race against time. My partner focused on the road while I ran through protocols in my head, preparing for whatever lay ahead. We were almost there, just a few more blocks. And then everything changed. A blinding set of headlights. A split second of realization. The impact. The ambulance lurched violently as metal crunched against metal. My body was thrown forward as we spun out of control. Weightlessness for just a moment, then everything came crashing down. I felt it before I even understood it. The unbearable pain, the crushing weight, the suffocating silence. And then, nothing. Darkness. I don't know how much time passed, seconds, minutes, hours. But when I opened my eyes, I wasn't in the ambulance anymore. At first I thought I was dreaming. I was standing, but I felt no pain, no injuries. The weight of my body, the pressure of the accident, it was all gone. The world around me felt distant, muted. And then, as I turned my head, I saw something that made my breath catch. I was looking down at myself. My body was still inside the wreckage, crumpled and lifeless. My fellow paramedics were working desperately to save me. I saw my partner calling my name, shaking me, his voice frantic. I should have felt panic. I should have been afraid, but I wasn't. I felt peace, a deep, consuming peace that didn't make sense. I wasn't in my body anymore, and for the first time, I understood. I was dead. But this wasn't the end. Something, or someone, was coming. And in that moment, I knew. My questions were finally about to be answered. My body, battered and broken inside that ambulance, no longer felt real to me. It was as if I was no longer flesh and bone, but something else entirely. I knew I should have been afraid, grasping for answers, trying to make sense of what was happening, but I wasn't. There was no panic, no struggle, just a quiet understanding that something beyond my comprehension was unfolding. I looked down at the wreckage. The ambulance was barely recognizable, crumpled against another vehicle. Red and blue lights flashed across the night, casting eerie shadows over twisted metal and shattered glass. Chaos swirled below me, first responders moving frantically, voices urgent, sirens wailing. And then I saw myself. My partner was kneeling over me, pressing down on my chest, calling my name. His voice reached me, but it sounded distant, like an echo drifting through the wind. Firefighters and paramedics rushed around him, working desperately to bring me back. But I wasn't inside that body anymore. I was here, watching from above. I should have felt a surge of fear, of confusion. But instead, I felt something entirely unexpected. Peace. Not just the absence of pain or fear, but a peace so deep, so profound, that it made everything else seem insignificant. It was as if, for the first time, I was experiencing the world as it truly was, without the weight of physical existence pressing down on me. Time itself felt different. It no longer followed the same rules. Everything below me moved forward, yet I felt separate from it, untouched by its pull. And then, something changed. A light appeared, not in front of me, not behind me, but everywhere. It wasn't like any light I had ever seen. It wasn't harsh or blinding, but soft and alive, as if it had a presence of its own. It didn't just illuminate, it pulled me in. Not forcefully, not demanding, but with a gentle, undeniable invitation. The more I gazed at it, the more I felt something indescribable, a warmth, a love so pure it made everything else fade away. I knew I was supposed to go toward it. It wasn't a decision, not even a thought. It was a truth that settled deep within me, something more real than anything I'd ever known. There was no hesitation, no doubt. Every part of me was drawn to that light, as if I had always belonged there but had somehow forgotten until this very moment. As I drifted toward it, something inside me shifted. A realization settled over me with absolute clarity. I was dead. The life I had known, the long shifts in the ambulance, the late-night calls, the moments of triumph when we saved someone, the heartbreak when we couldn't, all of it was over. The questions that had haunted me for years, the ones about life and death, about who got to survive and who didn't, were no longer distant uncertainties. I was living the very thing I had spent years witnessing in others. But it wasn't what I had imagined. Death wasn't darkness. It wasn't emptiness. And it wasn't something to fear. It was something else entirely. It was leading me somewhere. And I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that I was about to understand everything in a way I never could before. I was leaving the world I had known. But I wasn't lost. I wasn't alone. Something or someone was waiting for me beyond that light. And as I moved toward it, everything around me began to dissolve. Yet I wasn't afraid. The peace only grew stronger, wrapping around me like the warmest, most comforting embrace I had ever known. The weight I had carried all my life, gone. The ache in my body, the heaviness on my soul, gone. It was as if I had been freed from something I hadn't even realized had been holding me down. And then the light shifted. It wasn't just brightness anymore. The light had depth, a presence, something beyond anything I could comprehend. And then, in the midst of it, I saw him. I didn't need an introduction. No one had to tell me who he was. I just knew. Jesus stood before me. And in that instant, every thought I had ever had about him, every story I had read, every sermon I had listened to, every image I had formed in my mind faded into nothing. He wasn't just a figure from paintings. He wasn't just a historical teacher or a religious idea. He was real. He was alive. And he was more powerful than I had ever imagined. Yet, despite the sheer magnitude of his presence, there was no fear, no intimidation, only love. A love so overwhelming, so pure, that it felt like it might bring me to my knees under its weight. He didn't speak right away, but he didn't have to. The moment our eyes met, I felt everything. It was as if my entire life had been laid bare, not just the things I'd done, but the intentions behind them. The silent thoughts no one else had ever known. The questions I had never spoken aloud. The doubts. The times I had wondered why some people lived and others didn't. why I had witnessed so much suffering, why I had spent my life trying to save others, only to find myself standing here. I should have felt ashamed, knowing that every hidden part of me was exposed, that he could see the moments I had struggled to understand his ways, the times my faith had drifted into routine rather than devotion. But I didn't, because there was no condemnation in his eyes, no disappointment, no anger, only love, a love so deep, so full, so complete, that it shattered every fear, every insecurity, every hesitation still lingering inside me. I wanted to speak, to tell him how much I'd believed, that I had tried my best, that I had wrestled with understanding his plan. But before I could say a word, he spoke first. "There is something I need to show you." And the moment he said it, everything around me shifted. The light didn't disappear, but suddenly I was no longer standing still. I wasn't walking, yet I was moving. There was no wind, no sensation of motion, yet I was being carried, drawn forward into something beyond anything I had ever known. Then the world unfolded before me, but not as I had always seen it. I wasn't just looking at Earth in a physical sense. I was seeing something deeper, more profound. It was as if I could see past the surface, past people's words, past their actions, straight into the state of their souls. I saw people everywhere, walking, working, scrolling on their phones, chasing careers, success, money, approval, entertainment, moving so quickly, so blindly, as if nothing beyond their daily tasks existed. Some were obsessed with wealth, convinced they had all the time in the world to think about the deeper things later. Others were drowning in distractions, social media, television, gossip, endless plans for the future, but no thought of eternity. And then, what I saw next shook me even more. I saw churches. Some were grand and overflowing with people. Others were small and humble. From the outside, it looked like worship, like prayer, like devotion. But when I looked closer, so many hearts were far from him. Lips moved in prayer, but minds wandered elsewhere. People listened to sermons, but their hearts remained unchanged. Some were simply there out of habit, going through the motions like checking off a to-do list. Others came for appearances, making sure they looked like good Christians. But the moment they stepped outside, they went back to their lives as if God had never been a part of them. Even some pastors, the very ones meant to lead and shepherd others, had lost sight of their true purpose. Some were more concerned with growing their influence than growing people's faith. Others softened the truth, telling people what they wanted to hear instead of what they needed to hear. There were still those who were genuine, whose love for God was pure, but far fewer than I had expected. Jesus stood beside me, watching it all unfold. Then he spoke, and his words carried a weight that settled deep into my soul. They believe they have time, but they do not seek me. The moment he said it, I understood. People thought they had control. They assumed they could put God on hold, turn to him later, when life slowed down, when they had done everything they wanted to do first. They believed there would always be another day, another chance, another moment. But I had been a paramedic. I had seen firsthand how quickly life could be taken away. I had held the hands of people who had no idea that today was their last day. I had heard whispered final words from those who thought they had years left, only to find out they had minutes. Yet somehow I had never fully grasped the urgency of it all, until now. I thought about myself, about all the times I had prayed, gone to church, and tried to be a good person. But had I truly prioritized God? Had I given him everything, or just what was convenient? I had spent my life saving people physically. But had I ever thought about saving them spiritually? Had I ever told them that this world is temporary, that what comes after is what truly matters? Had I lived in a way that pointed people to Jesus? Or had I been too focused on the here and now? I had believed in God. I had prayed. But I'd also been distracted, caught up in my responsibilities, my routines, my own ideas about what mattered. And now, standing beside Jesus, seeing the world through his eyes, I realized just how much people were missing the point. It wasn't just about going to church. It wasn't just about saying you believe. It wasn't about following religious habits without true surrender. It was about truly seeking him. And as I looked at Jesus, I saw something in his eyes that broke me even more. He wasn't angry. He was heartbroken, because he loved every single one of them, and so many didn't even realize how much they needed him. I turned to him, my voice barely a whisper. "What happens to them?" Jesus looked at me. His expression held sorrow, but also hope. "That is why I brought you here," he said. "There is still time, but they must choose me." In that moment, I knew whatever Jesus was about to show me next would change everything. I stood beside him, watching the world continue as if nothing had changed. But I had changed. I felt the weight of something pressing down on me. Not fear, not regret, but urgency. A deep knowing that something had to be done, that people had to wake up before it was too late. Jesus turned to me, his eyes filled with both love and sorrow. And for the first time, I truly understood. Believing in God wasn't enough. It had never been enough. I had spent my life believing in him, acknowledging his existence, praying when I needed strength. But had I truly followed him? Had I truly sought him? I had called myself a Christian, but I had lived so much of my life on autopilot, just assuming that because I wasn't doing anything wrong, I must be doing enough. But was I? Jesus didn't wait for me to speak. He didn't have to. He already knew what was in my heart. "It is not enough to believe," he said. "They must follow me." His words hit me like a wave, crashing against everything I had ever thought about faith. I had always assumed that as long as I believed in God and tried to be a good person, I was on the right path. But now, I saw the truth. Faith wasn't passive. It wasn't just something you agreed with. It was something you lived. Jesus lifted his hand, and suddenly, I saw it. I saw visions of lives being wasted. Not in obvious sin, but it wasn't outright rebellion. It was something far more dangerous. Distraction. I saw people going to church out of habit, but never opening their Bibles at home. I saw people praying when they were in trouble, but forgetting about God when things were good. I saw people serving in ministries, volunteering, doing good things, but never actually spending time with Jesus. And then I saw something even more heartbreaking. I saw people who thought they had time. I saw a man who always told himself he'd get serious about his faith later, but his later never came. I saw a woman who spent her life chasing success, promising herself that one day she would make time for God. But that day never arrived. I saw entire families, so busy, so distracted, so caught up in their daily routines, that they never realized they were missing the most important thing. And then I saw myself. I saw all the years I had spent saving lives physically, but never stopping to ask if I had done enough to help save them spiritually. I had rescued people from accidents, from heart attacks, from overdoses, from disasters. But had I ever told them that their eternal life was what mattered most? Had I ever shared the truth, that without Jesus, they had no hope beyond this life? The weight of it crushed me. How many opportunities had I missed? How many people had I helped, only to send them back into the world, never knowing if they had met the one who could save their souls? Then Jesus spoke. His voice was calm, yet filled with a weight I could feel in my very spirit. They must stop delaying their faith. They must live for me now. His words settled deep inside me, and I knew. They weren't just for the people I had seen. They were for me too. Jesus wasn't showing me this to condemn me. He was giving me a second chance, a chance to change, a chance to make sure that if I ever returned, I would never waste another moment living passively. Faith wasn't about checking a box. It wasn't about being a good person. It wasn't about just going to church or saying the right things. It was about choosing Jesus every single day, above everything else. It was about truly following him, not just when it was easy, not just when I had time, but in every moment. I turned to him, my heart pounding. "What do I do?" I asked. He looked at me with a love so deep it nearly broke me. "You must go back. You must tell them." I didn't know how. I didn't know who would listen. But I knew one thing for certain. If I was given the chance to return, I would never live the same way again. Everything around me shifted. The weight of the world I had just seen, the distractions, the wasted time, the people living unaware of what truly mattered, was gone. And in its place, something else unfolded before me. Something so overwhelming, so beyond anything I had ever experienced, that for a moment I forgot everything else. I was standing in a place that human words could never fully capture. It wasn't just beautiful. It was alive. Every color was more vibrant, every sound more pure, every breath filled with something I had never felt before. It wasn't just light that surrounded me. It was love itself. A presence so deep, so all-encompassing, that I felt like I was finally home, as if this was where I'd always belonged, but had somehow forgotten. Even the air carried peace, not just the absence of pain or stress, but a perfect, consuming peace. A peace I'd never known, not even in my happiest moments on earth. There was no fear, no sadness, no lingering regrets. Every burden, every question, every doubt I'd ever carried was gone, replaced by a joy so profound I thought my heart might burst from it. And then I saw them. People. Countless people. They weren't just standing there. They were alive, in a way I had never seen before. Their faces shone. Their eyes were filled with a light so pure it was almost too much to take in. And the love between them, the unity, the joy. It was unlike anything I'd ever witnessed on earth. There was no division, no struggle, no worry. They weren't rushing, they weren't stressed, they weren't trying to be anything. They were simply, some were singing, their voices blending in a harmony so breathtaking that it didn't just fill the air, it filled me. Others were laughing, embracing, talking, their faces radiant with a peace that made them ageless, as if time itself no longer had any hold on them. But it wasn't just their joy that overwhelmed me. It was why they were here. These were the ones who had truly followed God, the ones who had surrendered everything to Him. Their hearts, their plans, their very lives. They had chosen faith over fear, love over selfishness, obedience over convenience. They hadn't just believed in God, they had lived for Him. And now they were experiencing what He had promised all along. Jesus stood beside me, watching as I took it all in. I turned to Him, my voice trembling, barely able to speak through the sheer awe of what I was seeing. "What is this place?" I asked. Jesus looked at me, His eyes filled with a love so deep, so boundless, I could hardly comprehend it. "This," He said, "is what I have prepared for those who follow me with their whole heart." The words settled inside me, sinking deeper than anything else I had ever heard. This was not earned. It was not a reward for the perfect, for those who had never failed. It was a gift for those who had trusted Him completely, who had chosen Him above all else, who hadn't just gone through the motions of faith, but had truly given themselves to God. And I wanted to stay. Everything in me longed to be part of this, to remain in this place where nothing was missing, where every desire was already fulfilled in the presence of God. For the first time since my life had ended, I felt no pull toward what I had left behind. This was where I wanted to be. This was where everyone was meant to be. But then, something shifted. The peace didn't fade, but a realization settled over me, carrying a weight I couldn't ignore. I wasn't finished. My time here wasn't meant to last. Before I could even speak, Jesus turned to me, his expression tender but firm. "You must go back," he said. The words hit me like a sudden jolt, pulling me from the deep peace that had wrapped around me. Go back? How could I? How could I possibly leave this place? Jesus must have seen the hesitation in my face, because he placed a hand on my shoulder, steadying me. "There are many who still do not know," he said. "They must hear, and you must tell them." A deep ache filled me. I didn't want to go. I wanted to stay here, to let go of everything I had left behind. But I also knew that if I stayed, if I refused, there would be people who would never hear what I had just seen. And so, even as my heart longed to remain, I knew what I had to do. I looked at Jesus, my soul torn between the longing for heaven and the responsibility he had just placed on me. I took a deep breath, though I had no lungs in this place, and with everything in me, I whispered, "I will go." The moment I said it, the light around me shifted again, and I felt something pulling me away. I was leaving heaven, returning to a world that had no idea what I had just seen. I stood there, surrounded by the beauty of heaven, feeling a peace so deep it reached into every part of me. There was no fear, no burden, no pain, only a sense of belonging, as if I had finally arrived where I was always meant to be. I could have stayed there forever, letting go of everything I had left behind, knowing that this place held no sorrow, no regrets, only perfect love and complete fulfillment. For the first time in my existence, I felt absolutely whole. Then Jesus turned to me, his eyes filled with something I couldn't quite name at first. There was love, unshakable, infinite love, but there was also something else, expectation. "You have a choice," he said, his voice steady, gentle, yet filled with unshakable authority. The words settled inside me, making my heart ache in a way I'd never felt before. I could stay. I could remain in this place, surrounded by peace, never knowing pain or struggle again. I could let go of everything. The weight of the world, the worries, the suffering I had witnessed as a paramedic, the countless nights I had spent so many nights questioning why some people lived while others died. If I stayed, I would finally be free from all of it, the doubts, the pain, the weight of every life I had tried to save and every life I couldn't. Or I could go back to the world I had left behind. The same world full of distractions, where people chased things that didn't matter, where churches were filled with people who thought they knew God but had never truly sought him. I hesitated. The weight of what Jesus was asking me to do sank in. If I went back, it wouldn't just mean returning to my body. It would mean stepping into the same pain, the same struggles. I would have to face people who wouldn't believe me, who would dismiss everything I had seen as nothing more than a dream or a hallucination. Jesus knew my thoughts before I spoke them. "Many will not believe you," he said, his eyes never leaving mine. "Some will ignore you, but there are hearts that need to hear this." His words wrapped around me, pressing into my soul. If I stayed, the message would never be spoken. The truth he had shown me, the urgency of faith, the reality of heaven, the call to live for him now, not later, would die with me. I looked at the people in heaven, the ones who had truly given their hearts to God. They had made their choice while they were still on earth. They hadn't delayed. hadn't waited for the perfect moment to seek him. And now they were here, exactly where they were meant to be. But what about the ones still in the world? What about the people I had treated as a paramedic? The ones I had saved physically, but never once thought to save spiritually? What about the ones I had seen in the vision Jesus had shown me? The people who thought they had time, but never truly sought him? I dropped to my knees, overwhelmed by the weight of it all. My chest ached, not from fear, but from the deep realization that if I refused, I would be choosing comfort over calling, silence over truth. I looked up at Jesus, my vision blurred with tears. My voice broke as I whispered the only words that mattered. Lord, I will go. The moment I said it, something in Jesus' expression softened. A peace, deeper than anything I had ever felt, radiated from him, filling every corner of my soul, as if he was pleased with my decision, as if he had known all along what I would choose. He stepped forward, placing his hand on my shoulder, steadying me, anchoring me in a love so strong that I knew, no matter what happened when I returned, I would never be the same again. Then go, he said, and tell them. The moment the words left his lips, everything around me shifted. The golden light, the warmth, the indescribable beauty of heaven began to pull away. I could feel myself being drawn back, pulled from the place where I had longed to stay forever. Before I could even process what was happening, before I could take one last moment to memorize the perfection of this place, I was gone. A sudden jolt shot through my body, like being pulled from the deepest sleep into a world that was too heavy, too loud, too full of pain. I gasped for air, my chest rising violently, my lungs burning, as if I had been without breath for far too long. The weight of my body came crashing back all at once. Every ache, every sensation, every reminder that I was no longer in that place of perfect peace. The sounds around me were chaotic, voices shouting, machines beeping, hurried footsteps moving around the room. I could barely process what was happening. But then I heard someone say, "He's back!" Oh my God, he's back! I forced my eyes open, blinking against the harsh hospital lights. The world felt too dense, as if gravity had increased, as if everything was pulling me back into something I no longer belonged to. My limbs were heavy, my head pounded, but inside me was something even heavier, the knowledge of where I had just been. A doctor leaned over me, his face a mix of shock and relief. "You had no pulse," he said, as if he still couldn't believe what he was seeing. "We tried everything, but you were gone, and now you're breathing. Your heart is beating, like nothing ever happened." They called it a miracle, but I knew it wasn't just that. I knew what had happened. I had stood before Jesus. I had seen heaven, and now I carried a message, a responsibility so heavy on my soul that I could barely think of anything else. The days that followed were a blur. Doctors ran tests, searching for answers. They couldn't explain how I'd come back. My body was battered from the crash, but I was alive. The medical explanations didn't matter to me. What mattered was the message, and I had to tell people. At first, I told my family. I sat them down, my hands still shaking, my voice hoarse as I told them everything, the crash, the moment I left my body, the presence of Jesus, the vision of the world, the warning, the urgency of faith, the choice he had given me. I watched their faces as I spoke, eyes widening, expressions shifting between disbelief and awe. Some of them cried, overwhelmed by what they were hearing. My mother clutched my hands tightly, tears rolling down her face. "I believe you," she whispered. My sister sobbed quietly, shaking her head, saying she had always felt like something was missing in her faith, but never knew what. But not everyone believed me. I saw it in my brother's face. The hesitation, the way he avoided my eyes, the polite, forced smile as he said, "Maybe it was just a dream. You went through a traumatic experience. The brain does strange things under stress." I didn't argue. I didn't need to. I knew the truth. Next, I told my co-workers. They had seen death up close, just like I had. They had spent years alongside me, pulling people from wreckage, restarting stopped hearts, delivering the worst news to families who had prayed for a different outcome. They had seen the randomness of it all, the ones who survived against all odds, and the ones who slipped away despite our best efforts. So when I told them what had happened to me, some of them listened carefully, nodding slowly, as if something deep inside them resonated with my words. One of them, a man I had worked with for nearly a decade, broke down right in front of me. Tears in his eyes, he said, "I've been struggling with my faith for years. Hearing this made me realize I need to get right with God." But others dismissed it. "Sounds like oxygen deprivation to the brain," one of them said with a shrug, taking a sip of his coffee. Near-death experiences are common. People see what they expect to see. I had expected that reaction, but I didn't stop sharing. I went to my church. I stood in front of the congregation and told them what Jesus had shown me. I told them how faith wasn't just about believing, but about truly following him, seeking him now, instead of waiting for some perfect moment that might never come. Some sat in complete silence, their faces unreadable, their eyes locked on me. Some were moved to tears, heads bowed, hands gripping the edges of their pews, as if something deep inside them had just woken up for the first time. And then there were the few who shifted uncomfortably in their seats, whispering among themselves, shaking their heads, convinced that I had simply been hallucinating, that what I was saying didn't fit neatly into their understanding of faith. But I didn't stop sharing, because I knew the truth now. I had seen what awaited those who truly gave their hearts to God, the ones who didn't just claim faith but lived it. And I had also seen those who wasted their time, thinking they had years to figure things out, only to realize too late that life was never guaranteed. Jesus had sent me back for a reason. I wasn't here to convince everyone. I wasn't here to argue with those who refused to believe. I was here to tell them what I had seen, what I had learned, what Jesus had told me to share. I had been given a second chance, something most people would never get, and I was going to use it. Now, as I sit here, back in the world I once knew, I carry a burden I never expected. Not heavy in the way pain or suffering is, but heavy in the way that truth is. When you know it cannot be ignored, I was given a second chance, a rare gift that most people will never receive. And with that comes a responsibility I cannot ignore. I saw what awaits those who truly give their hearts to God, those who seek him fully, not just in words, but in the way they live their lives. I also saw the reality of how many people are lost, not because they have rejected God outright, but because they believe they have time. That faith is something they can pursue later, when it's more convenient, when they've finished chasing their own plans. But Jesus made it clear to me, faith is not just believing that God exists. It's not about going to church on Sundays out of obligation. It's not about saying a prayer when life gets hard, but forgetting him when things are good. True faith is about seeking him daily, making him the center of everything, knowing that every moment we are given is a gift that can be taken away at any time. If I had not been given this second chance, my story would have ended that night in the ambulance. And everything I had put off, every chance I missed to tell someone about God, every time I ignored the urge to pray, every moment I let distractions keep me from fully surrendering to him, would have stayed undone. So now I ask you, the person watching this, to consider a question that has burned in my heart since the moment I returned. Are you living in faith, or are you waiting for someday? Are you actively seeking God, giving Him your whole heart? Or are you assuming you have more time? Because time is never promised. I have seen, firsthand, how quickly life can be taken, how unexpected death is. How many people wake up in the morning thinking they'll return home, only for their lives to end in an instant? I was one of them. I didn't know my life would change that night, that my heart would stop, that I would find myself standing before Jesus, being shown the truth about what really matters. But you don't have to wait for a near-death experience to wake up. You don't have to go through what I did to realize that Jesus is calling you right now. He isn't asking for part of you. He isn't asking for the leftovers of your time and attention. He is asking for your whole heart. He is calling you to follow Him now, to seek Him now, to stop making excuses and truly live the life He created you for. Because one day you will stand before Him, just as I did. And in that moment, the only thing that will matter is, did you truly know Him? Did you give Him everything? Did you follow Him fully, not just in name, but in the way you lived? So I urge you, if this message has stirred something in you, do not ignore it. Do not push it aside. Don't tell yourself you'll think about it later, because later is never guaranteed. Seek God now. Live for Him now. Make sure that when your time comes, whenever that may be, you are ready. Because I promise you, nothing else will matter in that moment. Thank you for watching. If this testimony spoke to you, don't keep it to yourself. Like, share, and subscribe so that more people can hear this truth and wake up before it's too late.